satu tekad untuk mencetak generasi yang cerdas, unggul, dan berdaya saing.
Berkarya dan akan terus berkarya. Nantinya dulu membangun nusa dan bangsa, menjadi unggul rujukan untuk semua. Ayo semuanya ikut berkami. Let's sing together. 1, 2. Berkarya dan akan terus berkarya. Bakti
It's here with us again.
Yeah, come on.
What? It's a CAKRAWALA.
Mount State University. People say that the world won't orbit around you, 'cause it's so hard to look up when you're feeling down.
Ain't nothing in this world, paper, just how you like it. So don't stop, won't stop till you make yourself proud. And just keep on moving. Nothing's gonna stop us now. Let's prepare our future. Nothing's gonna waste. Let's make our way brighter. Gotta let it shine. We'll be up in the sky. Come on, baby, step inside my world. See how now we're turning and won't stop. 'Cause we ain't dreaming, we make it real. It's time to make a change. See, you're trying to get the number one, but don't forget what you want. Keep your hope high, make every time count. Get that confidence build up and know what you are for. There'll be bumps on your way, 'cause perfection is so quick to pour. Nothing's gonna do it if we ain't. The art of achieving is when we are learning all day, learning all night. We'll shine, and you'll see me rising. Just keep on moving. Nothing's gonna stop us now. Let's prepare our future. Nothing's gonna waste. Let's make our way brighter. Gotta let it shine. We'll be up in the sky.
As the world keep moving, people will always keep cheap. So stop daydreaming about your broken heart. Set your goal up high, then you'll see the light shining brighter than the sun.
Let's clap together and sing along. Come on, baby,
Step inside my world. See how now we're turning and won't stop. 'Cause we ain't dreaming, we make it real. It's time to make a change.
come on, baby.
Come on, baby, step inside my world. See how now we're turning and won't stop. 'Cause we ain't
masih menjadi tantangan sekaligus peluang dalam perguruan tinggi untuk mengasah inovasi. Didaulat sebagai kota pendidikan, Kota Malang menjadi rumah bagi gigitnya cita anak bangsa. Ragam asa keilmuan berpadu harmonis dalam semangat pembaruan. Salah satu garda terdepan dalam pengembangan potensi insani termasuk pendidikan. UM memiliki jati diri yang diwujudkan dalam simbol verbal The Learning University. Jati diri ini mengandung dua pemaknaan besar. Pertama, UM sebagai institusi secara terus-menerus belajar dan menjadi sumber belajar untuk meningkatkan diri. Kedua, semua sivitas UM harus berjiwa belajar dengan berbagai inovasi yang diciptakan dan dilaksanakan. Pengembangan dan penciptaan lingkungan belajar menjadi karakteristik utama pengembangan kampus UM. Pengembangan berbagai komponen sistem di UM dijiwai oleh belajar di berbagai sektor dan tataran. Visi UM menjadikan perguruan tinggi unggul dan rujukan bidang kependidikan, ilmu pengetahuan, teknologi, dan humaniora. Visi UM tersebut dapat dicapai dengan melaksanakan 4 misi UM berikut, yakni menyelenggarakan pendidikan dan pembelajaran di perguruan tinggi yang berpusat pada peserta didik, menggunakan pendekatan pembelajaran yang efektif, dan mengoptimalkan pemanfaatan teknologi. Menyelenggarakan penelitian dalam ilmu kependidikan, ilmu pengetahuan, teknologi, ilmu sosial budaya, seni, dan olahraga yang temuannya bermanfaat bagi pengembangan ilmu dan kesejahteraan masyarakat. Menyelenggarakan pengabdian kepada masyarakat yang berorientasi pada pemberdayaan masyarakat melalui penerapan ilmu kependidikan, ilmu pengetahuan, teknologi, ilmu sosial budaya, seni, dan olahraga. Serta menyelenggarakan tata pamong perguruan tinggi yang otonom, akuntabel, dan transparan yang menjamin peningkatan kualitas berkelanjutan. Berdiri sejak 18 Oktober 1954, UM lahir dengan nama Perguruan Tinggi Pendidikan Guru atau PTPG. Kemudian, PTPG mengalami perubahan nama pada tahun 1957 menjadi Fakultas Keguruan Ilmu Pendidikan atau FKIP dan menjadi Institut Keguruan dan Ilmu Pendidikan atau IKIP pada tahun 1963. Menjelang genap 5 dekade atau pada tahun 1999, transformasi dilakukan kembali dengan menjadi Universitas Negeri Malang yang dikenal hingga saat ini. UM telah mengokohkan diri sebagai salah satu bagian dari 12 lembaga perguruan tinggi kependidikan dan termasuk dalam 15 kampus terbaik di Indonesia. Melalui jenjang diploma hingga doktoral, UM berkomitmen menciptakan insan yang berdedikasi pada dunia pendidikan. UM hadir untuk menyelaraskan pendidikan dengan konteks kampus merdeka, merdeka belajar. Mahasiswa UM tersebar dalam berbagai program pendidikan berkualitas dan bereputasi tinggi. Selain mahasiswa reguler, UM juga menerima mahasiswa luar negeri sebagai langkah melebarkan kiprah dalam dunia pendidikan internasional. UM menerapkan kurikulum transdisipliner dan kurikulum berbasis kehidupan life-based learning. UM juga mewadahi pengembangan diri dan prestasi sesuai bakat dan minat mahasiswa melalui 34 UKM yang terbagi menjadi kelompok penalaran, kesenian, olahraga, kesejahteraan, kerohanian, dan minat khusus. UM senantiasa terus berupaya menyediakan pembelajaran yang berkualitas, mengembangkan pengetahuan ilmiah, dan produk-produk teknologi di tingkat internasional. Melalui visi dan misi yang telah ditetapkan, UM mengabdikan diri untuk menjadi rujukan dan unggulan dalam inovasi pembelajaran atau Excellence in Learning Innovation. UM terus memerankan diri sebagai sumber belajar, tempat belajar, dan inspirator pembelajaran bagi generasi muda. Melalui komitmen untuk menjadi pusat unggulan dalam bidang inovasi belajar, Universitas Negeri Malang senantiasa berkarya dengan wujud inovasi bernas. Bersama UM, kami belajar dan mengabdi untuk negeri, memberikan kontribusi, gagasan inovatif, dan karya nyata. Universitas Negeri Malang, Excellence in Learning Innovation.
Cek, cek, cek. Cek.
Yang ini mati loh.
Cek 1, 2, 3.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are about to commence the opening ceremony of the Indonesian International Conference on Bilingualism, IICB 2022.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Good afternoon and selamat siang. The Director of Graduate School, Universitas Negeri Malang, Professor Eri Jatmika Rudianto Wahyuwardana. The keynote speakers of IICB 2022, Professor Dr. Miro Mufado, Associate Professor Rebecca Lurie-Starr, Professor Ellen Bialisto, Dr. Katarina P. Sekampo, Dr. Latisha Asmat Shafi, Dr. Hilda Cahyani, Professor Abigail Kong, Dr. Maya Rahindranath Akhtahian, and Professor Seiwa Chung.
Heads of Department, Graduate School, Universitas Negeri Malang, the chairpersons of IICB 2022, Dr. Siti Nurino, and distinguished presenters and participants. We would like to extend our heartfelt gratitude for your presence.
Welcome.
Welcome to the first Indonesian International Conference on Bilingualism, IICB 2022.
This conference is organized by the graduate schools of Universitas Negeri Malang.
Globalisasi menjadi tantangan sekaligus peluang dalam perguruan tinggi untuk mengasah inovasi. Didaulat sebagai kota pendidikan, Kota Malang menjadi rumah bagi gigitnya cita anak bangsa. Ragam asa keilmuan berpadu harmonis dalam semangat pembaruan. Salah satu garda terdepan dalam pengembangan potensi insani termasuk pendidikan. UM memiliki jati diri yang diwujudkan dalam simbol verbal The Learning University. Jati diri ini mengandung dua pemaknaan besar. Pertama, UM sebagai institusi secara terus-menerus belajar dan menjadi sumber belajar untuk meningkatkan diri. Kedua, semua sivitas UM harus berjiwa belajar dengan berbagai inovasi yang diciptakan dan dilaksanakan. Pengembangan dan penciptaan lingkungan belajar menjadi karakteristik utama pengembangan kampus UM. Pengembangan berbagai komponen sistem di UM dijiwai oleh belajar di berbagai sektor dan tataran. Visi UM menjadikan perguruan tinggi unggul dan rujukan bidang kependidikan, ilmu pengetahuan, teknologi, dan humaniora. Visi UM tersebut dapat dicapai dengan melaksanakan 4 misi UM berikut, yakni menyelenggarakan pendidikan dan pembelajaran di perguruan tinggi yang berpusat pada peserta didik, menggunakan pendekatan pembelajaran yang efektif, dan mengoptimalkan pemanfaatan teknologi. Menyelenggarakan penelitian dalam ilmu kependidikan, ilmu pengetahuan, teknologi, ilmu sosial budaya, seni, dan olahraga yang temuannya bermanfaat bagi pengembangan ilmu dan kesejahteraan masyarakat. Menyelenggarakan pengabdian kepada masyarakat yang berorientasi pada pemberdayaan masyarakat melalui penerapan ilmu kependidikan, ilmu pengetahuan, teknologi, ilmu sosial budaya, seni, dan olahraga. Serta menyelenggarakan tata pamong perguruan tinggi yang otonom, akuntabel, dan transparan yang menjamin peningkatan kualitas berkelanjutan. Berdiri sejak 18 Oktober 1954, UM lahir dengan nama Perguruan Tinggi Pendidikan Guru atau PTPG. Kemudian, PTPG mengalami perubahan nama pada tahun 1957 menjadi Fakultas Keguruan Ilmu Pendidikan atau FKIP dan menjadi Institut Keguruan dan Ilmu Pendidikan atau IKIP pada tahun 1963. Menjelang genap 5 dekade atau pada tahun 1999, transformasi dilakukan kembali dengan menjadi Universitas Negeri Malang yang dikenal hingga saat ini. UM telah mengokohkan diri sebagai salah satu bagian dari 12 lembaga perguruan tinggi kependidikan dan termasuk dalam 15 kampus terbaik di Indonesia. Melalui jenjang diploma hingga doktoral, UM berkomitmen menciptakan insan yang berdedikasi pada dunia pendidikan. UM hadir untuk menyelaraskan pendidikan dengan konteks kampus merdeka, merdeka belajar. Mahasiswa UM tersebar dalam berbagai program pendidikan berkualitas dan bereputasi tinggi. Selain mahasiswa reguler, UM juga menerima mahasiswa luar negeri sebagai langkah melebarkan kiprah dalam dunia pendidikan internasional. UM menerapkan kurikulum transdisipliner dan kurikulum berbasis kehidupan life-based learning. UM juga mewadahi pengembangan diri dan prestasi sesuai bakat dan minat mahasiswa melalui 34 UKM yang terbagi menjadi kelompok penalaran, kesenian, olahraga, kesejahteraan, kerohanian, dan minat khusus. UM senantiasa terus berupaya menyediakan pembelajaran yang berkualitas, mengembangkan pengetahuan ilmiah, dan produk-produk teknologi di tingkat internasional. Melalui visi dan misi yang telah ditetapkan, UM mengabdikan diri untuk menjadi rujukan dan unggulan dalam inovasi pembelajaran atau Excellence in Learning Innovation. UM terus memerankan diri sebagai sumber belajar, tempat belajar, dan inspirator pembelajaran bagi generasi muda. Melalui komitmen untuk menjadi pusat unggulan dalam bidang inovasi belajar, Universitas Negeri Malang senantiasa berkarya dengan wujud inovasi bernas. Bersama UM, kami belajar dan mengabdi untuk negeri, memberikan kontribusi, gagasan inovatif, dan karya nyata. Universitas Negeri Malang, Excellence in Learning Innovation.
Welcome back to IICB. I am Yusmita.
And I am Nana. We will be your host for this opening ceremony. Ladies and gentlemen, we are about to begin the ceremony with national anthem, Indonesia Raya. In its 68th year, Universitas Negeri Malang has various events that open vast opportunities nationally and internationally. As one of 8 faculties at UM, the graduate school hosted conferences annually to set up an annual program, a platform to share knowledge and insights on interdisciplinary studies.
The theme of this year's conference in bilingualism in Indonesia is Bilingualism in Indonesia, Challenges and Opportunities. This year, we are honored to have 8 keynote speakers from various parts of the world. From Indonesia, Professor Dr. Nurul Murtado, Dr. Katarina P. Sukamto, Dr. Hilda Cahyani. From Singapore, Dr. Rebecca Dewey Starr. From Canada, Professor Ellen Bialisto. From Malaysia, Dr. Latisha Ashmad Safi. From USA, Professor Abigail Fong, Dr. Maya Ravindranath Akhtaryan, and from Taiwan, Professor Shei-Hua Chuang.
Ladies and gentlemen, now I would like to invite the chair of the conference, Dr. Siti Munirah, to deliver her welcome address. Dr. Siti Munirah, the stage is yours.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. May the peace, mercy, and blessing of Allah be with you. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the organizing this is the first conference on bilingualism initiated and hosted by Sekolah Pasar Sarjana Universitas Negeri Malang in collaboration with University Technology Mara Perlis Branch Malaysia. This conference is intended to socialize our plan to establish a Master of Management in Bilingual Education. This is a new study program at Sekolah Pasar Sarjana UM, specializing in the management of bilingual education. It is such an honor to be able to welcome keynote speakers, presenters, and participants from many countries: Indonesia, Canada, Singapore, USA, Taiwan, Malaysia, and Saudi Arabia to join this event. This conference attempts to create a space where the researchers and practitioners can exchange academic knowledge and develop networks among scholars interested in bilingualism and bilingual education. The theme of the first IICB is Bilingualism in Indonesia, Challenges and Opportunities. Its 16 sub-themes have attracted 40 online presenters from Indonesia, Australia, Taiwan, and Saudi Arabia, and 1 non-presenting participant from Hong Kong. Our keynote and featured speakers have considered these topics, and we are delighted to hear diverse perspectives on bilingualism and bilingual education. We welcome the keynote speakers from Universitas Negeri Malang, Professor Nurul Murtado, from Atmajaya Catholic University of Indonesia, Dr. Katarina P. Sukamto, from University Technology Mara Perlis Branch Malaysia, Dr. Latisa Asma Safi, from York University Canada, Professor Ellen Bialisto, from National University of Singapore, Associate Professor Rebecca Dewey Starr, from Cornell University USA, Professor Abigail C. Ford, from University of Rochester USA, Dr. Maya Ravindranath Akhtaryan, and from National Sun Yat-sen University, Taiwan, Professor Shei-Hua Chuang. We would also to welcome our featured speaker from Polytechnic Negeri Malang, Dr. Hilda Cahyani, as well as our pre-conference workshop speakers from Universitas Negeri Malang, Professor Dr. Sri Rahmayanti, Dr. Evi Nurulailizen, Dr. Sari Karmina, and from Polytechnic Negeri Pontianak, Dr. Nurmala Elwin Simbolon. This conference is impossible without the faithful dedication and hard work from our committee members and the support from Sekolah Pasca Sarjana Universitas Negeri Malang, and also our partner, University Technology Mara Perlis Branch Malaysia. We thank all the committee members for volunteering their ideas, time, and energy to serve our community. Finally, we would like to thank all presenters for their effort and willingness to share their research, and also all participants for their time and active participation. We hope you will enjoy the conference and have a productive discussion at the meeting. Thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Dr. Siti Muniro. Ladies and gentlemen, the second welcoming address will be delivered by the Rector of Universitas Negeri Malang, Professor Ahmad Fakhruddin. Please welcome Professor Ahmad Fakhruddin.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Rector of University Teknologi Mara, Perlis Brand Malaysia, Associate Professor TS Dr. Sukor Sanim Muhammad Fauzi, Director of Sekolah Pasca Sarjana Universitas Negeri Malang, Profesor Dr. Eritri Jatmiko Rudianto, Professor Ellen Bailey-Stock from York University, Canada, Professor Xu Hua Chuang from National Sun Yat-sen University, Taiwan, Professor Abigail Kohn from Cornell University, USA, Professor Dr. Nurul Murtado from Universitas Negeri Malang, Associate Professor Rebecca Luri Star from National University of Singapore, Dr. Latisa Asma Safi from University Teknologi Mara, Perlis Branch Malaysia, Dr. Maya Abdin from University of Rochester, USA, Dr. Katarin Sukamto from Atmajaya Catholic University of Indonesia, IICB Organizing Committee, presenter and participants, welcome to the first Indonesian International Conference on Bilingualism IICB 2022. Ladies and gentlemen, since 2022, the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted everyone globally. The educational system worldwide is not spared from being affected by the pandemic. Without a choice, various forms of academic activities have been forced to migrate online and conduct remotely to control the spread of the virus. Despite this challenging style, the education sector has especially shown resilience and perseverance in adapting to this change to ensure that the academic activities, including teaching and learning, survive. The pandemic has also changed the dynamic of multilingualism in Indonesia. While there has been a dramatic shift of multilingual situation over the course of the last century, the shift has shown to be even greater due to various linguistic innovation, both in education setting and public communication. The IICB 2022 conference provide an excellent platform for the dissemination of knowledge, research idea, and innovation on bilingualism education with health educators, researchers, practitioners, students, and education stakeholders to overcome the challenge and meet the demand of this 21st century. I believe that the presenters and participants will enjoy the stimulating conference and leave it with better insight that will help to enhance the teaching and learning discourse and activities. I would also like to express my greatest appreciation for our partner, University Technology Mara. We hope that our partnership will continue to grow in the future. Last but not least, I would like to convey my deepest gratitude and congratulations to the IICB 2022 committee for their effort and hard work in making this conference a reality. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you very much, Professor Rafiuddin. Ladies and gentlemen, to officially open the conference, we would like to invite the Vice Director of Graduate School, Professor Nurul Murtado. Professor Nurul Murtado, the stage is yours.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. On behalf of the Director of Graduate School of Universitas Negeri Malang, I declare the first Indonesian International Conference on Bilingualism officially open. I wish you an enjoyable, productive, and insightful moments at the conference. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Welcome back to IICB 2022. Everyone, before we continue to our next agenda, let's take a moment to take pictures together. Online participants, please turn on your camera for the photo session. Our Zoom host will lead the process. Thank you so much, online participants. We wish you to stay with us for a bit more of the welcoming process. We would also like to invite the committee members in the room today to gather here at the front of the stage for a picture. For your information, offline participants, our event today is held in Building 8, Level 9 of Graduate School at Universitas Negeri Malang.
Thank you. Concludes the opening ceremony of the first Indonesian International Conference on Bilingualism, IICB 2022. Allow us to share general information for the seminar protocol, parallel presenters, and participants. The conference will be conducted using the following seminar protocol. First, ensure your network has stable internet connection. Make sure you have updated or installed the latest versions of Zoom. Adjust your name or ID screen with proper name of yours. And it is recommended to use a headset or earphones for clearer and better sounds. And also it is recommended to use a laptop or PC for easier and better features. Don't forget to turn off your microphone or mute mode as your default situation. You may need to turn it back on when it is needed.
For our presenters, please note that the power sessions are conducted in 3 different breakout rooms, A, B, and C. Choose the room you want to join and then you can click join. There will be a host and moderator in each virtual room, which will assist you in moderating the session and checking the presentation time. The host will provide technical assistance related to the virtual room. There are 3 parallel sessions in each room, accommodating 6 presenters.
The time allocated for 6 paper presentation in each room is 120 minutes. Each presenter will have 20 minutes, including 15 minutes for presentation and 5 minutes for question and answer. Certificates for presenters will be distributed when the presenters join at least 70% of the sessions, including 7 sessions of scheduled session, including the keynote speech and parallel sessions. When joining a Zoom room, presenters must rename themselves using the following template: roomname.presenter.fullname. For example, c.presenter.siti-muliro.
For the participants, you can join keynote presentation sessions through the Zoom link sent via email, or you can have a look at our program book. Please check the schedule of the parallel session in the program book and choose accordingly. Again, the power sessions are conducted in 3 different breakout rooms, A, B, C. You can choose the room you want to join and then you click join. You must join a session no later than 15 minutes after it starts. Please check your connection. We have the template for your participation name. Our moderator will provide this in the chat box of your virtual room.
Participants should join all sessions. Attendance list will be shared at the end of each session. During keynote presentation sessions, participants can write questions in the chat box. The questions will be answered by the speaker during the Q&A sessions after the presentation. During the parallel sessions, participants can write their questions in the chat box. The questions will be read by the moderator in the allocated time. An attendance list will be shared at the end of each session.
If you need any assistance, do not hesitate to chat with the room host or the moderator. More detailed information about the conference can be found in the program book. You may have a look at our website as well. We wish all the participants and presenters a great moment at the IICB 2022 conference. We would appreciate your active participations. We will announce the best presenters and participants at the closing ceremony on Sunday.
To start the marathon of 3-day conference, we would like to invite our first distinguished keynote speaker of this year's conference, Professor Dr. Nurul Murtado and Dr. Siti Muniro as the moderator. That is all from us. Thank you for joining the opening ceremony, and we'll give this forum to Ms. Siti Muniro. Have a wonderful conference.
It is very nice to see you all here today. Department, Faculty of Letters, Universitas Negeri Malang. I'm here acting as the moderator of the first plenary session. First thing first, I would like to read the short bio of Professor Nurul. Professor Nurul Murtado is a faculty member of the Arabic Department of Universitas Negeri Malang. He earned his PhD in linguistics from University of Indonesia. His research interests are in the areas of Arabic language teaching as foreign language and Islamic studies. Professor Nurul will talk about the practice of bilingual education in pesantren. Pesantren is Muslim boarding school in Indonesia. The title of his presentation is an overview of bilingual education practices in pesantren, what the research tells us. Without further ado, please welcome Professor Nurul Murtado. The floor is yours.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to share with you pesantren Islamic boarding education, where we'll talk about bilingual. When we are talking about pesantren, we can divide it into two. The first one is traditional and the second one is modern. When we are talking about traditional pesantren, means that they focus on Arabic for reading comprehension, dealing with Islamic literature or kitab kuning. Kitab mean books, kuning is yellow. But we are not talking about yellow pages, because yellow pages means something else. The education of Arabic, teaching Arabic for reading comprehension of Islamic literature, there are two kinds of types. There are two types of teaching. One, sorokan, or in Arabic talaki, one student, one teacher. One student have to read and translate in front of the teacher. And the second one is pandongan or halakah, means a group of students with one teacher. Both of sorokan and pandongan use grammar translation method, and they use Pegon, translation in Japanese with Arabic letters, and mastering Arabic grammars. For pesantren, traditional pesantren, there are many inventions. Many inventions were created to foster mastering reading comprehension for Islamic books. And the second one is modern pesantren, where two languages are taught, Arabic and English. When in traditional pesantren, Arabic is taught for only reading comprehension, where the modern pesantren, both of Arabic and English, are taught for skills, listening, speaking, reading, and writing. And there are, of course, models of teaching for bilingual in modern pesantren. And of course, and daily activities inside and outside classroom, they have to speak English and Arabic. When a student are caught speak other than English or Arabic, they have to be punished. And the punishment is like he has to write a poem, or he write a poem. He has to read many pages. So the punishment is not physical, but he has to read or write or memorize a lot of vocab. This bilingual education in pesantren, of course, there are obstacles. Among them are less motivation of students, because they are forced to learn by heart many vocab in daily life. I think that's all. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Prof. Nurul, for the brief presentation related to the practice of bilingual education in pesantren. Okay, let me check whether there is any question in the chat box. All right. Okay, Dear audience, ladies and gentlemen, if you have any question, you can type your question in the chat box. All right, while we are reading the question from the participants, allow me to ask you a question, Prof. May I? Okay, the first question is related. This is out of my curiosity for the bilingual education practices in pesantren. If there are two languages, two foreign languages are taught in pesantren, English and Arabic, which one is prioritized? Is it Arabic or English or both?
Yes, of course. When two languages, Arabic and English, are taught in one pesantren, of course, both are the same. Neither Arabic nor English are neglected.
Thank you. All right, and also for Dr. Evi Nurulailizen, the question is, what kind of Arabic dialects are generally used in pesantren? Will you answer this question? Okay.
Okay, thanks for Bu Evi. Which Arabic is taught in pesantren? We are here in Indonesia and maybe all over the world, other than Arabic countries. The standard Arabic is taught, not spoken Arabic, where each country has. I can tell you, when I was in Sudan, 2011, I was there, and I would like to get tali. What is tali? Tampar? Rope. I'd like to get rope with Pak Khalisin, and I was in a coffee shop, and I asked her to get where to buy this rope, and she said nothing. But when Pak Khalisin knows that she said nothing, then he repeated once again with standard Arabic, but she still speechless. She didn't answer what we asked. Means that she doesn't understand standard Arabic. And another story, when my friend was in the first time in Baghdad, he entered the market and wanted to buy something. But the seller raised his hand and said, Amin, Amin. Means that this person doesn't understand Arabic, standard Arabic. But when we talk with academic person, of course they understand. But laymen don't understand standard Arabic. Okay, that's why some universities teach dialect, Arabic dialect, Arabic, what is it? Accent in teaching, but we don't teach them, but we only teach them with standard Arabic. Okay, thanks.
Right, the next, this is
Okay. Any suggestion for increasing the motivation?
yes.
I think the and maybe the method of teaching, also the media should be improved so that she or he enjoy when studying Arabic or English. Some of teachers use the same method as he gave the first time when he was yeah. Because pesantren in yes, like memorizing with just like drill. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, of course.
All right. Okay. So I do hope that this answers your question.
Ibu Azaratul Karima. Okay, now another question from Ibu Evi Nurul Lailizan. I think, oh yeah, there is another question after Bu Evi Nurul. Ibu Evi Nurul Lailizan is also wondering about the Arabic language proficiency of the teachers, Prof. Especially in pesantren. How about their proficiency, both in Arabic and also in, for example, in English?
Okay, this is a wonderful question. For Arabic and of course English, we rarely do test them as IELTS or TOEFL. Of course, most teachers in pesantren don't understand where their proficiency is, where level they are in. So, of course, like we are now for Arabic Department of Universitas Negeri Malang, nowadays, this year, we are conducting a research using a series, Arabic series from United Arab Emirat Arab. This is a series of Arabic, and we are trying to do for our students. Also, we UPI and UNHAS join us for conducting this research to improve our students' proficiency in Arabic. And the series has, of course, 3 levels: intermediate, then advanced, and of course, the 3 levels. And we are using what is it? The standard of Europe? CFR. CEFR. CEFR. Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Tested related to their proficiency, it doesn't mean that there is no standardized tests for the teachers, Prof. How about, I'm wondering whether their pronunciation is wrong and it, the students not understanding. What do you think about it?
Yes, of course. I think, of course, we are in doubt of their proficiency when they never be tested. But of course, because most of them never be tested, so no one knows about the
that they said that the symbol that mentions and the
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Bapak hari ini dipakai. What benefit to the country that from bilingual in pesantren communities?
In pesantren context, of course, students will gain two kinds of proficiency, both of Arabic for reading Islamic books and for English for of course for entering universities. Yeah. Yeah.
The scholarship opportunity to get the scholarship is widely open compared to those who index of proficiency in foreign languages.
Yeah. Of course, students with two languages has more open, what is it, opportunity to,
Yeah, where they go to.
yes, for Arabic, most students are going to Sudan or Egypt or Saudi Arabia or
Okay.
yeah, Arabic countries. Of course, for English, they can gain opportunity to get what is it? Beasiswa, scholarship from universities and so forth.
Scholarship. All right. This is the last question from.
What kind of language would pupils use in pesantren? Is it only a formal?
What language is what language is used in pesantren? Is it only a formal language? So the interview is like
Yes, for traditional pesantren, they use kitab kuning, but not yellow pages. Islamic books. And for modern pesantren, they use, of course, Islamic books. And I think some of pesantren also take advantages from YouTube and other sources in digital sources.
Is it allowed in pesantren to have gadget for santri?
Some,
or
but not all.
most of the pesantren
Yeah, forbid. Yeah, yeah.
So how can they access YouTube?
Yes, for pesantren, they certain pesantren which allows their students to use gadget. So of course, but some like what I saw in Turkish pesantren here in Semarang, they of course maybe some years ago they also allowed their students to use gadget, but for certain times, for certain hours, not all day and night.
There is limitation, but the opportunity to access the technology is open in pesantren, especially for the modern pesantren. All right, thank you so much, Prof, for the engagement.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
All right, now please allow me to present the certificate of appreciation for your plenary speech, Prof. This marks our plenary session, especially for the first plenary session, is already end. It is ended now. All right, so please give applause, laugh, thumb up emoticon for Professor Nurul, dear participant. Thank you so much.
Hi, Bu Rahmati, just checking. Can you hear my voice? Okay, yeah. All right, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, the first plenary session ends a bit earlier, but I think and I believe Dr. Rebecca Luristar approved, yeah, to move the next session or her session to be earlier too. Okay, thank you very much. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. We are now having the second plenary session. Sitting with us today, Associate Professor Rebecca Luristar from National University of Singapore. She is teaching and conducting various form of research, in the Department of English, Linguistics, and Theater Studies at the National University of Singapore. And she earned her PhD in linguistics with a designation in cognitive science from Stanford University. And I am very grateful to call her my former supervisor. Thank you so much. And this afternoon, she is going to talk about the sociolinguistic development of local and expatriate children learning Mandarin in Singapore. Okay, Dr. Starr, you have around 20 minutes, I guess, I believe. Yeah, I'm going to check it with the committee. And then 10 minutes for question and answer session. Yeah, okay.
Hi, thank you so much for inviting me to speak at this first Indonesian International Conference on Bilingualism. I'm a sociolinguist at the National University of Singapore, and I work on sociolinguistic variation in multilingual settings. Today, I'd like to share with you some of my research on the sociolinguistic development of local and expatriate multilingual children growing up in Singapore, particularly regarding their acquisition of Mandarin. In this talk, first I'll be introducing some concepts relevant to the acquisition of sociolinguistic knowledge, and then I'll review some background on the situation of Mandarin in Singapore, as well as transnational migration, which forms the backdrop of the study. Then I'll discuss some findings from a project I've been pursuing called the Voices of Children in Singapore project, including both social evaluation tasks and a speech production task. And finally, I'll discuss some implications and future directions of this research. While early in the history of sociolinguistics, scholars believed that children did not acquire an understanding of sociolinguistic variation until adolescence, today there's a broad consensus that as children grow up in a community, they acquire knowledge of that community's sociolinguistic norms, in part by observing patterns of variation around them. In other words, they learn how different types of people tend to use language, and what sorts of language use patterns are appropriate in different contexts, through exposure to a wide range of individuals and contexts in the community. However, for children who are acquiring a second language in a classroom environment, acquisition of sociolinguistic knowledge is more challenging, as their exposure to different speakers and situations is typically more limited. A similar challenge is encountered by children acquiring a heritage language, because their exposure to this language is more limited than in a conventional speech community. This process of sociolinguistic development among L2 and heritage language learners is even more complicated in dialectally diverse contexts, in which children are exposed to a range of language varieties from various sources. In this sort of setting, there may be no single sociolinguistic norm to acquire, but rather a number of different norms and linguistic practices used by different groups in the community. In my work on acquisition in two-way Mandarin-English language immersion schools in the United States, I argue that in these sorts of settings, children do not simply mimic the language use patterns of their teachers or peers, but rather become active negotiators of sociolinguistic variation. Children identify and target the features that they believe are most consistent with their identity. The situation of dialectally diverse settings becomes even more complex in contexts where there is tension over the status of varieties present in schools and the community. There may be no consensus, for example, regarding what the targeted standard is in schools, and the varieties used in the classroom may vary dramatically from teacher to teacher. Today we'll be considering the situation of Mandarin in Singapore, in which children must learn to navigate this particularly thorny sociolinguistic situation. Singapore is a small island nation in Southeast Asia that is both multi-ethnic and multilingual. It was founded as a British trading port in 1819 and has long-standing Chinese, Malay, and Indian ethnic communities, with the Chinese community comprising approximately 3/4 of the population. Today, Singapore has 4 official languages: English, Mandarin, Malay, and Tamil. Although Mandarin is the official language associated with the Chinese community, historically, Mandarin was not spoken by Chinese Singaporeans. The Chinese population descends primarily from immigrants from regions of southern China who spoke several Chinese dialects. The primary dialect groups in Singapore are historically Hokkien, Teochew, and Cantonese. As a result of this immigration history, Mandarin was not widely spoken as a first language in Singapore until the late 20th century. One key event in Singapore's linguistic history that helps to explain the current situation of Mandarin and Chinese dialects is the Speak Mandarin campaign, which was launched in 1979 and is ongoing today. As a result of this campaign, Chinese dialects were banned or restricted in media and governmental institutions. In fact, this media ban continues today. Crucially, as part of this campaign, parents were encouraged to shift from the use of non-Mandarin dialects to Mandarin in the home, and this contributed to a precipitous drop in intergenerational transmission of dialects. So, looking at the course of language shift in Singapore, we can see dramatic changes from the beginning of autonomous governance until today, due to education policies, government campaigns, and societal change. Focusing just on Mandarin, other Chinese dialects, and English, let's keep in mind that some other languages are also spoken in Singapore, so these percentages won't add up to 100. In the 1957 census, we can see that Mandarin was spoken by only 0.1% of Singaporeans as their primary home language. So it was really a very rare first language at the time. In contrast, over 75% of Singaporeans spoke Chinese dialects, and 1.8% spoke English. Jumping to 33 years later, in 1990, we can see the impact of the Speak Mandarin campaign and of English education in schools, as the number of Singaporeans speaking Chinese dialects dropped to 39.6%, while Mandarin rose to 23.7% and English rose to 18.8%. Now here are the 2020 census numbers. Although it looks like Mandarin has stayed relatively stable here, actually what's happened is that there was a rise between these two periods to about 35%, and this has now fallen again to 29.9%. We can see that dialects have fallen quite a lot to only 8.7%, and English has risen to almost 50%. Actually, there's been a very rapid rise in English. As of 2015, this number was 37%, so this is a huge jump just within the past 5 years. If we focus just on the Chinese Singaporean population in the 2020 census, we can see an even more dramatic shift among the youngest population. Among Chinese children aged 5 to 19, 75.7% speak primarily English at home, while only 23.6% speak primarily Mandarin. On the other hand, this number is a bit deceiving because when we look at secondary languages spoken at home, we see that 64.4% of children this age use primarily English but also Mandarin as a secondary home language. Meanwhile, the use of dialects is now extremely low among this younger generation, with only 0.5% of these children speaking primarily a dialect at home. All right, now that we have some idea of language shift in the community, let's take a closer look at Singapore Mandarin. Mandarin was first introduced into Singapore via Chinese medium schools, which were teaching via dialect until the early 20th century, when they shifted to Mandarin. At that point, there was widespread L2 acquisition of Mandarin by native speakers of Chinese dialects in these schools. And so it is in this early 20th century period when scholars believe that conventions developed for colloquial Singapore Mandarin. This variety has historically been viewed as non-standard, but has also been pervasive in the community ever since Mandarin was introduced. The phonological features of colloquial Singapore Mandarin are pretty typical of Southern accented Mandarin, but it does have some distinctive features as well. Here we have a table of some phonological features of colloquial Singapore Mandarin as identified by Locke 1989, which was a variationist study of Singapore Mandarin. We can see in the right-hand column a summary of each feature's frequency in his data. Unsurprisingly, colloquial Singapore Mandarin features a merger of alveolar and retroflex sibilant initials, so that zhi, chi, shi is almost categorically realized as zi, ci, si. And then we have occasional hypercorrection of that feature, with zi, ci, si realized more like zhi, chi, shi. Something more distinctive to Singapore Mandarin is the fronting of palatal initials ji, qi, xi. In particular, xi is produced as si almost categorically before unrounded vowels in Locke's data. Although this feature is pervasive in Singapore, there's not a lot of awareness that this is a non-standard feature. This will become relevant later on in our analysis today. All right, and here we see a few more classic phonological features. And in part 2 of the table, a few more phonological features. We won't be focusing on these today. I just wanted to highlight them for you, for those who are interested. As we've seen from the history of language shift in Singapore, the typical Singapore Mandarin speaker has historically been a native speaker of Hokkien or another Southern Chinese dialect who learned Mandarin as an L2. This has been the case until recent decades. For this reason, prior work on this variety, such as Locke 1989, has focused on speakers with this sort of background, understandably. But there has always been a small population of L1 English speakers learning Mandarin in Singapore. And today, this population is actually the majority of children. So how do L1 speakers of English speak Mandarin in Singapore? In work with my student Tianxiao Wang examining the Mandarin features of prominent Singaporean politicians, we find that there are indeed dramatic differences between the Mandarin spoken by native dialect speakers versus native English speakers in Singapore. In particular, we find that native English speakers who have learned Mandarin as an L2 acquire certain local features, most notably C to C, which is prevalent in the community but subject to low awareness, but they do not acquire the alveolar retroflex merger, which is more salient in the community. These findings are interesting, but this is a very small-scale study of speakers who are not very typical of the population. So more research is needed to clarify how English speakers are acquiring Mandarin in Singapore. When considering how children growing up in Singapore might be exposed to varieties of Mandarin, we can identify a few major possible domains. First, for those children who do hear Mandarin at home, we have the home. Then we have educational domains, the community, and media. Let's consider the situation of Mandarin exposure in educational domains, since that will be a focus of today's study. Although Singapore's government schools, which are referred to as local schools, are universally English medium, all children attending local schools are required to study a mother tongue language that is associated with their ethnicity as a secondary subject. Another crucial point here is that parents cannot simply opt out of this system because Singapore's citizens cannot attend private schools without special exemptions, which are generally not granted unless the child has spent a considerable time abroad. As a result of these policies, virtually all Singaporean children of Chinese ethnicity, regardless of what languages they might speak at home, must study Mandarin as their mother tongue subject in school. So, where are Mandarin teachers in local schools from? The majority of these teachers come from the local region, from Singapore and Malaysia, while a small minority come from China. Local schools teach Mandarin based on locally developed materials that notionally target so-called standard Mandarin. What this means in practice is that they teach local terms for certain items, such as fruits and vegetables, but they do teach standard phonology. Crucially, however, local students are not limited in their Mandarin education to official mother tongue classes in local schools. As a result of anxiety and competition caused by compulsory Mandarin in local schools, an extensive shadow education market has developed for Mandarin tuition and enrichment, meaning extracurricular classes. In my work with Shrutika Kapoor, we explore the discourse of Mandarin enrichment centers. The market for these centers is significant, and the majority of children studying Mandarin in local schools are also enrolled in Mandarin tuition or enrichment. In contrast to local schools, these enrichment and tuition centers are dominated by teachers from mainland China rather than from the local region. Similarly, preschools, which almost all Singaporean children attend, primarily hire Mandarin teachers from mainland China. So the demographics of these teachers looks quite different from the teachers students encounter in local compulsory education. I should also mention, although there's no research on what regions most of these teachers from China are coming from, based on my personal experience, it seems that preschools and enrichment centers are only hiring teachers who speak standard Putonghua, standard Mandarin, so we can assume that the accents of these teachers are pretty standard. And then we have private schools. The private school market in Singapore consists almost entirely of international schools and are primarily attended by non-citizens due to the restrictions that I mentioned earlier on Singaporean citizens attending international schools. Similar to the preschools and enrichment centers, these schools primarily hire teachers from mainland China. So, what does this mean for Singaporean children and the varieties of Mandarin that they are likely to encounter in educational settings? Due to exposure to Mandarin in preschools, enrichment, and local schools, the typical Singaporean child is likely to have exposure to both local and mainland varieties in school domains. For children attending international schools in Singapore, however, it's unclear that they would have any exposure to local Mandarin and would instead be exposed primarily to mainland varieties. All right, so that's the situation with educational domains. What about exposure in the community? Since the 1990s, Singapore has encouraged immigration from mainland China. This wave initially consisted of high-skilled immigrants, but now includes workers filling low-skilled jobs such as bus driving and service industry positions. The precise number of migrants from China is not available. It's approximately 500,000. Let's look now at what previous language attitude studies of Mandarin tell us about how Singaporeans feel about different types of Mandarin. Studies of explicit language attitudes of Singaporeans consistently find that Singaporeans do view Beijing Mandarin quite positively as standard and educated sounding. What these studies also find that is of particular note here is a surprising lack of explicit attachment to colloquial Singapore Mandarin. Scholars argue that Singapore Mandarin does not hold the same status as a marker of local identity as other language varieties, most notably Singlish or colloquial Singapore English, which is considered one of the most prominent symbols of Singaporeanness. While Singaporeans may view Beijing Mandarin as standard, it's not necessarily the case that Singaporeans want to speak like mainlanders. Locke argues that while Singaporeans do view mainland norms as standard, they also feel that they cannot adopt these features authentically, particularly the retroflex sound, and therefore they avoid these features. So just as for English, although Singapore's norms for Mandarin are to some extent exonormative, these are not norms that Singaporeans are necessarily willing to adopt themselves. So given all of this information, there are a few things we might speculate about regarding children and their attitudes towards Mandarin varieties in Singapore. First, as teachers from mainland China increasingly dominate sectors of the education market, and mainland varieties are a rising presence in Singapore, is children's perception of these varieties changing? Secondly, is the decline of Mandarin as a primary home and community language in Singapore having an impact on children's attitudes towards local Mandarin and on their use of local features? The study I'll be talking about today examines both Singaporean and expatriate children growing up in Singapore. As an international financial hub, Singapore has attracted large numbers of foreign workers. Those workers who earn above a certain monthly salary are allowed to bring their children to Singapore. Historically, Singapore has a long-standing expatriate population, and their children primarily attended international schools, such as the Singapore American School. Today, however, this situation has changed, and many expat children now attend local schools. This has happened in part because the reputation of local Singapore schools has risen, but also because the cost of international schools has increased. In general, there's not as much separation between local and expatriate children today as there was historically in Singapore. Today, many children of both local and expatriate backgrounds attend the same activities, live in the same housing, and so on. The primary research questions we'll be addressing in today's analysis are: what do children learn about Mandarin variation in Singapore? And what sorts of Mandarin features are acquired by children in Singapore from various national, linguistic, and educational backgrounds? Today's findings are drawn from the Voices of Children in Singapore project, or VOX, which is an ongoing research project investigating the sociolinguistic knowledge and language use of local and expatriate children ages 5 to 19. There are 117 participants in the project so far, and it includes a range of perception and production tasks in both Mandarin and English. Today's talk focuses on the Mandarin findings, but I'll be mentioning how the English results compare. The Mandarin analysis for today focuses on 47 children ages 5 to 18, including 18 Singaporeans children and 29 expat children. This table breaks down the participants by nationality, school type, and home language. Singaporean in this case was defined conservatively as children born in Singapore with at least one parent also born in Singapore. The expatriate children have a range of national backgrounds. You'll notice here we only have a few Singaporean children in international schools due to restrictions on enrollment, as mentioned previously. Today's presentation focuses on 3 of the Mandarin tasks. First, we have 2 social evaluation tasks, a regional identification task, and an occupation task. I'll be reviewing what those involved in a moment. Then we have a word list reading production task. You can read more about the findings I'll be presenting today in an upcoming chapter in the volume indicated here. Both of the social evaluation tasks involved a verbal guise methodology in which there were 3 female speakers from northern mainland China and 3 female speakers from Singapore, all of whom were students at NUS. The mainland speakers recorded 2 mainland guises we're about to look at, and the Singaporeans recorded the 2 Singaporean guises. So, for the guises, the speakers were recorded reading simple sentences in Mandarin describing images. The 2 mainland guises were standard mainland Mandarin and northern accented mainland Mandarin, which involved rhoticization or erhua. Let's listen to the standard guise first.
画上有5个小星星.
And now the northern accented guise.
画上有5个小星星.
Here in red, we have indicated the R that's added on to hua to make hor. Then we have the standard Singapore Mandarin guise.
画上有5个小星星.
And lastly, the non-standard Singapore guise, which features a retroflex alveolar merger as indicated in the green here.
画上有5个小星星.
Each of the social evaluation tasks were presented to participants in the form of a game that used a PlayStation-like USB controller. The game was implemented on a laptop using the software Open Sesame. Each task was presented using an animated story narrated in English. All of the instructions for the tasks were in English, only the stimuli were in Chinese. The findings were then analyzed using generalized linear mixed effects modeling with Glimmer in the LME4 package in R. If you'd like to read more about the methodology for the study, you can check out the write-up of the English social evaluation tasks in my Language and Society article here. The scenario that was used to present the regional identification task was as follows. First, we had some cartoon frogs that appeared, these frogs here. The narrator told the participants that these frogs were going to an art museum to look at paintings. These frogs all look the same, but actually, some of them are from Singapore and some of them are from China. I wonder if we can figure out where each frog is from by listening to them talk about the paintings. So the child was then presented with a frog saying a sentence that described the painting, and they had to pick whether that frog was from Singapore or from China. And just to remind you, these instructions were given in English because not all of the participants were proficient in Mandarin. And also we didn't want to influence the results by using a particular variety of Mandarin in the instructions. Okay, after the regional identification task was over, the frogs went home and the rabbits came to the art museum. It was a busy weekend at the museum. These rabbits all look the same, but actually they do different jobs. I wonder if they figure out their job by listening to them talk about the paintings. And then, similarly, children were presented with a rabbit and asked to respond yes or no as to whether they thought it did a certain job. And here were the 2 jobs for this task. Some of the rabbits are Mandarin teachers. They teach children to read and write Chinese. And then here's the graphic that I made of the Mandarin teacher. On the board it says Huayu, which is the local term for Mandarin. And some of them are coffee shop workers. They make drinks for customers. And here's our little coffee shop rabbit. I should mention that the coffee shop is a salient location in Singaporean society. Many Singaporeans eat at least 1 meal a day in a hawker center, which is also sometimes called a coffee shop. And it's very common for even children to go to coffee shops to drink iced Milo, for example, which is what is being illustrated here. All right, so let's take a look at the findings for the region identification task. In this figure, we have our four major groups. Sing local, meaning Singaporean children attending local schools. Sing international, meaning Singaporeans attending international schools. Expat local, expatriate children in local schools. And then finally, expat international, expatriate children attending international schools. And each group is also divided up by home language. Then in the bars, we have Chai in red, meaning the standard Mandarin guys. We have Chai Nor, meaning the northern mainland Mandarin guys. Sin, meaning standard Singapore Mandarin guys. And Sin NS, non-standard Singapore Mandarin guys. The higher the bar here, the more accurate the participant at identifying this variety as being either from China or from Singapore. First, looking at all the Singaporeans in these bars here on the left, we see that the Singaporean children were very good at this task overall, particularly the non-Mandarin home group, which was virtually at 100% accurate in this task. In contrast, looking at the expats in local schools, the non-Mandarin home expats here cannot distinguish any of these regions above chance level. It looks like they're randomly guessing. Let's keep in mind here that 50% is chance level. But expats in international schools are showing a very different pattern. Their accuracy on the China guises is very high, but their accuracy on the Singapore guises is very low. This is because what they are doing is they are simply guessing China for every single guise. In other words, they think anyone who speaks Mandarin must be from China. So for the regional identification task, we have some very clear-cut differences among the participants who don't speak Mandarin at home. The Sing local group showed near perfect accuracy. The expat local group performed at chance, while the expat international group just thought everyone was from China. They are very China-oriented. Among participants who do speak Mandarin at home, the Sing local group showed high accuracy. The expat local group showed more accuracy on the Singaporean varieties than the mainland varieties, and the expat international group showed somewhat of the same China-oriented pattern as their peers who don't speak Mandarin at home. They believed that standard Singapore speakers were likely to be from China as well. However, they did correctly identify the non-standard Singapore guys as being Singaporean, so they performed marginally in that sense than their non-Mandarin home peers. Overall, when we compare performance on this task to the English version of the same task, we find that these same participants showed greater accuracy overall at a younger age on the English version of this task, in which the children had to identify Australian, Filipino, Singaporean, and Chinese accented English. This is a key point because it indicates that the issue is not with the task itself. It's not that the task was too difficult. It's simply that these children aren't as familiar with Mandarin varieties. Now let's move on to the occupation task. Because we have more subgroups here, we're going to look first at just the local school students. And then we have another graph coming up for the international school students. We have our same four guises here, Chai, Chai Nor, Sin, Sin NS. And then we also have separate bars for the teacher and the coffee shop worker occupations. The coffee shop worker here is labeled as cafe to fit nicely into the graph. In this graph, higher bars indicate a higher yes percentage, meaning more participants thought that the speaker did do this particular job. First, starting with the Sing local group, notice that both the Sing local Mandarin and non-Mandarin home participants strongly feel that the speaker with the standard mainland accent is a teacher. This is quite interesting, given that most Mandarin teachers in local schools are Singaporean, not from China. Turning to the coffee shop workers, there's no significant stratification here by variety, meaning that these participants do not feel that participants with non-standard accents are more likely to work in a coffee shop. Turning now to the expat local group, what is striking here is the low confidence overall in these ratings as compared to the Sing local ratings. In fact, there's no significant difference in each variety rating by occupation for this group. They are simply not sure. Now let's look at the international students' responses. One very notable pattern here for the international school students is that the northern accented mainland guys is rated as the most likely to be a teacher among every student group here. So key findings for the occupation task. First, Sing local participants showed very high confidence that standard mainland Mandarin was a Mandarin teacher, giving it a 90% rating, although such speakers are rare in the local school system. We also saw that international school students were significantly more likely than local school students to rate Northern accented Mandarin as likely to be a teacher. In fact, looking at the ratings of this guise among local school students, it received the second lowest rating for teacher, just above Sin NS. So obviously, local and international school students have very different ideas about the status of Northern accented Mandarin. We also saw that the expat local students had low confidence in this task, even among those who speak Mandarin at home. This presents a striking contrast with their Sing local peers who attend the same schools and were willing to give the Chai speaker a 90% rating for teacher. Across groups, we saw no stratification by variety for coffee shop worker. In other words, participants do not believe that non-standard Singapore Mandarin speakers are any more likely than standard speakers to work in a coffee shop. This is consistent with the sociolinguistic situation in Singapore, in which there is widespread use of non-standard features in Singapore Mandarin across socioeconomic groups. The results of this occupation task are particularly interesting in light of participants' ratings on the English version of this task. On the English version, the very same speakers from mainland China were rated as highly likely to be coffee shop workers and domestic helpers. In other words, it would seem that occupation judgment is closely linked to the prestige of an accent within a particular language. When they were speaking English, these speakers from China were rated as low status, but when they spoke Mandarin, they were rated as high status. All right, let's move on now to the production task. This was a reading task in which we will be focusing on 3 phonological features of colloquial Singapore Mandarin that we've already briefly introduced. Retroflex fronting, meaning the merger of 直直式 to 直直式. Alveolar backing, meaning the hypercorrection of alveolar 直直式 to 直直式. And finally, xi depalatalization, the pronunciation of xi as xi. The task employed here to elicit the data was a very simple elicitation task designed to be accessible to beginner learners and early readers. There were 30 items with 58 characters in total. And the way that each word was elicited was like this, with an image and an English translation in addition to the characters, to maximize the chances that children would know the word. No pinyin, meaning Chinese romanization, was given on the task to avoid providing phonological cues. To get an idea of what these data sound like, let's listen to some examples from 2 participants. First, we have a Singaporean student enrolled in a local school. I've indicated here whether their pronunciation of each term here is standard in the blue or non-standard in the red.
照片 午睡
So here, as we can hear, we have non-standard hypercorrection of the alveolar consonant to retroflex.
错 西瓜
And here we have non-standard pronunciation of xi to si. Next, let's listen to the second example participant. This is an expatriate child enrolled in international school. And again, the standard pronunciations are indicated in blue and the non-standard in red.
照片午睡错西瓜
So this student is producing more standard variants overall, with the exception of xi to si variant at the end here. And here are the overall findings for the reading task. Note that this y-axis goes up to just 70% to make the graph more legible. Higher bars here indicate more use of the regional non-standard variant. First, looking at the Sing local groups, we can see that the alveolar and xi features of the Mandarin and non-Mandarin home groups look very similar. However, in the light gray here, the use of non-standard alveolar retroflex merger is quite different, with the Mandarin home participants using this more at 34%, while the non-Mandarin home participants are using it at a rate of only 12%. If you will recall, this is a feature that Locke 1989 said was almost categorical among Singaporeans. So even this 34% here is quite low, given what we would expect from historical norms. We can also see that across groups, the C to C feature is the most common feature, except for the Mandarin Home Expat International group. And looking on the right at the Expat International non-Mandarin home group, we see that in fact they use no non-standard alveolar or retroflex tokens at all, but they do use some C2C feature. So key findings for the reading task. While the alveolar retroflex merger used to be almost categorical in Singapore Mandarin, this is clearly no longer the case. Local students, and particularly those who do not speak Mandarin at home, are using mostly standard variants for this feature. However, the C2C feature is still much more prevalent. And we also find that local school attendees use significantly more of this feature than international school students. Meanwhile, expats learning Mandarin in international school are acquiring a 100% standard alveolar retroflex distinction. However, they do still use some degree of C to C. We can speculate that this is because C is a marked sound and it doesn't exist in English. But this is still a bit of a mystery, given that English-speaking L2 learners of Mandarin would typically use a post-alveolar sh sound to approximate C, rather than a C sound. The final analysis I want to share with you today, I'm sure you must be wondering, are there any connections between participants' performance on these two sections of the study? Do children with different sociolinguistic knowledge speak Mandarin differently? And we do indeed find such a connection. Specifically, across the participant groups, children who are better at identifying the Chai guys, which is the standard mainland guys, also use significantly more standard phonological features. This makes a lot of sense. It suggests that children who are more aware of mainland norms are also more likely to use those norms in their own speech. What are some overall conclusions we can draw from these findings? First, we confirm a continued orientation towards external mainland norms for teachers among Singaporean children. In terms of language use, we see some evidence here that young Singaporeans, particularly those who don't speak Mandarin at home, are rejecting certain salient non-standard features of Singapore Mandarin. However, given that the C to C feature remains prevalent, it seems that we should not expect a wholesale adoption of mainland standard Mandarin features in Singapore. One of the most surprising findings in this work is that Singaporeans who don't grow up in Mandarin-speaking homes nonetheless show strong sociolinguistic knowledge of Mandarin varieties, and specifically stronger sociolinguistic knowledge than their expatriate peers in local schools. This indicates that they're not acquiring this knowledge of Mandarin variation in schools, but rather in the local community and perhaps via extended family. Regarding expats in international schools, these students seem to be developing sociolinguistic knowledge and norms entirely removed from local patterns. In fact, they seem to have little awareness that Mandarin is spoken by Singaporeans and associate it instead only with China. Overall, we see that although expats who attend local versus international schools have similar social backgrounds, their sociolinguistic development is dramatically shaped by school setting. In terms of the implications of this research, I'd like to first highlight that despite the rapid language shift that is ongoing in Singapore, Singaporean children who grow up speaking English in the home are nonetheless absorbing knowledge of the social meanings of Mandarin varieties in the community, and this is knowledge that their non-Singaporean classmates do not acquire. Further investigation is needed to better understand exactly how children are acquiring this knowledge and what the role is of community language use in children's acquisition of sociolinguistic knowledge. Secondly, as this research has demonstrated, rapid changes are underway in how Singapore Mandarin is spoken, with children acquiring Mandarin primarily in school settings, now avoiding certain salient features of Singapore Mandarin. We need further work on how Mandarin in Singapore is evolving, and to what extent variation patterns are conditioned by social background and home language use. Okay, finally, some future research directions. I'm sure you are all thinking there weren't enough participants in this study, and what are children whose families come from China doing? This is exactly the motivating question behind Phase 2 of the Vox project. where we'll be focusing on collecting data from the children of families who have immigrated from mainland China to examine how their identity construction interacts with their language production in English and Mandarin. And also, I wanted to mention another project I have in progress, the Singapore Multilingual Corpus Project. This is a corpus aiming to collect data from Singaporean multilinguals, looking at English, Mandarin, Malay, Tamil, Cantonese, other dialects as they are spoken by Singaporeans. We are hoping to collect this data to document how Singapore's Chinese dialects are spoken before they're entirely gone, and to better understand how the various languages of Singapore are spoken as heritage languages. All right, thank you very much. I'd like to thank all of the families who have participated in this research project, as well as our undergraduate research team. And thank you again for inviting me to speak at this conference. I'm very happy now to open up the floor for any questions.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. It was such a wonderful project. I've heard quite a lot about the initial progress and current progress and probably last progress of this, the project that you're doing, and it looks great. Yeah. Thank you so much, Dr. Sa. Now, it seems that we're having a couple of questions right now here.
Yeah, I can see there's some really good questions in the chat. Okay, so I think I can just address them in turn.
Yeah,
The
sure.
first question is the accent of Singapore Mandarin versus mainland Mandarin connected to the idea of circles of English as in Cotru's model? This is a great question. This is something that I have proposed and some other scholars have also proposed, that we can think of Singapore Mandarin as being a sort of peripheral outer circle style of Mandarin. But just like Cotru's model that has its limitations, right? This model also has limitations as well. But it does help to think of Singapore Mandarin in this way, in the sense that ideologically speaking, a lot of people perceive Singapore Mandarin as not being as native, not being as legitimate as the type of Mandarin that's spoken in China. Yeah, that's definitely part of what's going on. So yeah, that's a helpful way to think about it, I think. So good job identifying that. Okay, there was another question here that the finding shows that local Singaporean children have the highest accuracy in Mandarin. So I want to clarify, there's a couple different tasks that I presented. One of them is a perception task where the children try to identify which Mandarin speakers come from China and which come from Singapore. That was the task where the Singaporean children are the best at that task, yeah. But in terms of production, in terms of the standardness of their Mandarin, that's actually not what we found. We found that it's the expatriate children who attend international schools who are using the most so-called standard Mandarin. And that's because the type of Mandarin that they are being exposed to is from speakers from China who are speaking very standard Mandarin. So what we find is that Singaporean children who speak Mandarin in the home, they're hearing it from their parents and grandparents who speak kind of non-standard local Mandarin, and they are also acquiring some of those features as well. Yeah, so I guess kind of ironically or confusingly, it's the children who have the least home exposure to Mandarin who end up learning the most standard Mandarin because local Mandarin is not considered standard. Yeah, okay. But in terms of the question which I highlighted also in the conclusions, it is really surprising and interesting that in terms of regional identification, the Singaporean children who don't speak any Mandarin at home, they are the best at knowing who is from where when they speak Mandarin. So clearly these children are learning about different types of Mandarin somewhere in the community. They don't seem to be learning about it at school and not in the home. So it must be through extended family or the community in some way. Yeah, okay.
Dr. Sta, how about the nannies? I mean, the caregiver in this case, especially for the expatriate.
Oh, yeah. So there are no nannies from China in Singapore due to visa rules. There are strict controls on which countries the helpers can come from, as you may know. So that includes the Philippines, Myanmar, Indonesia. Those are the main places that the helpers are coming from. There are 0 helpers from China.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's highly likely not coming from nannies.
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
Sorry,
Oh,
Karma.
and then we had a question about Singlish. Oh, this is a very broad question. It's a good question. What makes Singlish different from fluent English? Okay, so Singlish is a contact language. And in the case of contact languages, what is happening is that different languages are coming together. So you get structural features, grammatical features from one language or several languages, and then most of the vocabulary coming from another language. So in the case of Singlish, this was formed during the colonial period of Singapore. So at that time, the first students who were learning English, they were primarily Malay speaking and also Chinese dialect speaking. So they were speaking Hokkien, Cantonese, and these languages, as well as Malay and local dialects of Malay that were spoken by the Chinese population local to the region. Okay, so for that reason, Singlish has a lot of influence from Malay structures as well as Chinese dialect structures, not so much from Mandarin in particular, because Mandarin wasn't really spoken very much at that time. So that's why Singaporeans, when they speak English, they sound very different from people from China, right? Because the way that they speak English doesn't really, isn't very strongly influenced by Mandarin. Okay, so maybe that helps to answer the question. That's just the start of the answer, though. There's a lot of research on this topic. Okay, we have more questions from Sari. Hi, do you want to?
Hi, Rebecca. Thank you. Sorry for turning off the camera, if you don't mind.
Okay. No, that's fine.
Okay. I was wondering the social cultural aspects that influence the children not using Mandarin. Are there any social cultural aspects that influence them not using Mandarin in your findings? Because, for example, children, maybe not in Malang, but children in Semarang, for example, they are shy using the Javanese language. They prefer to use Indonesian. So because they think that Javanese is not cool, sounds cool. So are there any social cultural aspects, in your
Absolutely, yeah. So this has influenced the shift away from speaking dialect, Chinese dialects, which is maybe the most comparable to something like Japanese, where the grandparents are dominant speakers of Chinese dialects, but the young people, they feel that their dialect proficiency is not very good. And when they try to speak it with the grandparents might tell them, oh, it's not good, right? And so they feel discouraged from speaking dialect, right? In terms of Mandarin, though, you have a similar situation. Most children are consuming English language media. They're watching American television, listening to Western music, right? And so culturally speaking, they're not strongly interested in Chinese culture. And so they feel that speaking English is cooler. And really, and the other thing is that in terms of education, here in Singapore, schools are almost entirely English medium. So from the parents' perspective, they would rather that the children speak English at home. If they have to choose one language that they're going to mostly speak at home, they will choose English for educational reasons. But historically in Singapore, there is a strong socioeconomic stratification when it comes to language use. So if you look at young people who are going to go to university, they are much more likely to speak English in the home.
I see. Okay. Thank you so much, Rebecca.
No problem.
Sorry. I'm a bit away for a couple of seconds. I don't know why. Okay. Thank you, Busari. And unfortunately, I didn't know what she is asking. But anyway, Rebecca, I remember one thing in one of the slides you presented just now, that age seems to be one of the prominent predictor of language shift in Singapore. I learned that this is also the case here in Indonesia, where young speakers become the, one of the language change, the agent of language change. Did you also see other possible factors in addition to age that contributes to the language shift in Singapore?
I mean, there's there's a lot of, as I mentioned, socioeconomic effects, but there are also these effects that are more subtle. So even within university goers, which university you attend also has a big impact. Which secondary school you attend even has a big impact. So some of my students have been examining children who go to like the top schools versus so-called neighborhood schools, which are not considered the top schools. And even within that, we find differences in language use. So in Singapore, I mean, you could say that that's part of socioeconomic status, but it's a very subtle type of class difference that's going on in Singapore.
If it is the case in Singapore, I feel that, and I assume to be quite true here, it also happening, going to that direction in this case, social class and socioeconomic.
There's also, I should mention, there's some historical factors because until the 1980s in Singapore, there was a two-track education system. So some parents were going to mother tongue medium schools until the 1980s. So quite a few Chinese families, they went to Chinese medium primary and secondary schools. And so those people are now parents or grandparents. And you can also see that impact on the children whose parents went to English medium school and whose parents went to Chinese medium school has a knock-on impact on their language use as well over time.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, that's interesting direction. Regarding the future directions of your research, and probably more specifically the future direction of language shift in Singapore itself. Did you see? Sorry, did your data tell something about this? The future, outlook of Singapore.
I guess the most notable thing that's going on is coming from the census data. As I mentioned, when we compare the 2015 general household survey data to 2020, it's only 5 years. But in those 5 years, the number of Singaporeans saying they speak mainly English at home has gone up by maybe 12 percentage points.
Okay.
So it's really an astonishing rise, and it's likely to continue at this very sharp trajectory. So we were quite surprised to see that number really rise very, very quickly. And so, under those circumstances, I think this change is going to continue to accelerate. But as I mentioned, it's still the case that the majority of households say they do speak some Mandarin at home. The other thing that's happening is that this shift towards English is starting to also affect other ethnic groups in Singapore, because it used to be the case that Malay Singaporeans were mainly speaking Malay at home, but really we can see this is starting to change as well now. And so for that reason, there's all sorts of things happening in the education economy, where now you have tuition being offered for Malay as a mother tongue class, whereas maybe 10 years ago, no one was offering because no one needed the help. So these kinds of things are also happening.
Your last information is kind of interesting, and it's stimulate another question and that I have in my mind about. I know this probably not a part of your project, like looking at other ethnic group in Singapore, but regarding the language ideology and attitude. I know you mentioned a couple of things, couple of findings of language attitude from Chinese community in Singapore, but do you also probably see, probably not in your research, but somewhere else in other, publication from Singapore context, how do other ethnic groups in Singapore, take shape in this case in terms of language ideology?
Luckily, I have quite a few students who worked on these types of projects, so we know quite a bit about what's going on. So in the case of Malay, because there has been this attempt to institute standard Malay, And so younger people, my students have found, younger people have a stronger sense of what is standard and what is not standard in Malay, whereas older people, they don't really have this sense because this was a kind of top-down institution of what is a standard pronunciation in Malay. So over time, younger people are developing more norms about what is considered standard and what is not considered standard pronunciation in Malay. In Tamil, there's a very complex situation because there's Singaporean Tamil and then there's Indian Tamil. And a lot of Indians have recently migrated to Singapore. So you have different groups, subpopulations within those who speak Tamil, with different attitudes towards Tamil and who speak different types of Tamil. So a lot of complicated things going on there as well. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, do we still have question right here in the chat box? Or do we need to be? Okay, I don't think we have any more question. Thank you so very much.
You're welcome. Thank you so much.
Wonderful project you shared. We learn a lot from not only methodological aspect, but also, some of the key findings were really wonderful and surprising. Before we close, we're going to present a certificate of, it's a token of appreciation from the committee.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Again, let's close the second plenary session today by thanking Associate Professor Rebecca Lurista for the wonderful talk. We hope to be able to meet you again in the future and learn more from you. Please, ladies and gentlemen, give a round of applause for Professor Rebecca Lurista. Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay, so you may leave the Zoom room. Okay, so I think we're coming to the end of day one. Thank you so much, presenter and participant, for coming to the first day of Indonesian International Conference on Bilingualism. I would like to share with you a couple of important notes for tomorrow's session. The morning session at 8 a.m. we're going to have Prof. Ellen from the York University, Canada. And then the second one, we were going to have Ibu Katrin from Atmajaya Catholic University of Indonesia, and Dr. Latisa Asma Shafi from University Teknologi Mara Perlis Branch, Malaysia, and one featured speaker from Polynema. We're going to have Ibu Hilda Cahyani tomorrow. And after lunch and prayer break, we're going to start with parallel session. So we're so much looking forward to having you tomorrow. Thank you so much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, Bu Lali. Thanks, Rebecca.
Attendant? Oh yeah. Could you please fill out the form that we have posted here? Yeah, almost forget to say that.